Hi there, everyone. Will Dupree here in the KXAN live studio. Thank you so much for joining us for our live stream and our conversation that's going to ensue. Today, we're going to be focusing on a special report that's airing tonight on KXAN News, and it involves Rosa Jimenez. She was convicted 15 years ago for killing a toddler that was in her care as his babysitter. And we have our first chance to sit down with her and talk to her since she's been in prison after her sentence was learned, and there are some new details to be able to share today. So to be able to do that, I want to bring in two reporters who kind of helped out on this investigation. Investigator Avery Travis and digital reporter Chelsea Moreno. They're joining me here in the studio. Thank you so much for both being here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, and before we get into our conversation too deep at the moment, I want to first reiterate and share the history of this case. And for that, I'm going to turn to you, Avery. So get us started. Tell us about when this happened and what exactly happened.
Yeah, now the events of this case actually happened back in 2003. So it's been about 17 years since then. Rosa Jimenez was a neighbor of the Gutierrez family. That's the victim's family. According to that original trial, she was watching Bryan Gutierrez several times a week. On one of those days, that is when Bryan choked on a wad of paper towels. And then the events that followed were disputed in court. Ultimately, Rosa did arrive at a neighbor's house. They were able to call 911, but Bryan had been without oxygen for too long. He'd had that paper towel lodged in his throat. After being in hospice care for several months following, he did pass away. So absolutely heartbreaking story. 2 years later, the case went to trial, and prosecutors brought forth 4 medical experts who all testified that Bryan could not have done that to himself. They said this could not have been an accident. The defense for Rosa Jimenez brought forth one expert who was not a doctor, but instead a forensic pathologist, who argued that it could have been an accident. In later appeals, that expert has been called unqualified. So now Rosa is actually being represented by the Innocence Project, and they say they have new medical experts, one from Johns Hopkins, who say that they are actually more qualified in pediatric choking to talk about this case and talk about how it could have been an accident. So that is why there's been this renewed push to look more closely at her case, and the possibility of a retrial, like you said, Will, is actually possibly right around the corner.
Yes, and if you're just joining us again, we have investigator Avery Travis and digital reporter Chelsea Moreno joining us here in the KXAN live studio to talk about a special report airing this evening about Rosa Jimenez. Just a second ago, Avery, as you were talking, we were looking at some video back when the court proceedings happened 15 years ago. Quite a bit of time has passed since then, but you and Chelsea both went to the prison where she is now serving her sentence. Talk about how that was arranged. How did you all secure that interview with Rosa?
Yeah, so Rosa was sentenced to 99 years in prison. Like you said, she has been there for 15. We had another investigator on our team reach out and put in a request to just see if Ms. Jimenez would like to talk to us, and she said yes. She said it was a pretty easy decision, that she wanted to share her story, and so we did. We drove to Gatesville and we sat down with her, and she shared much about her life the past 15 years, about being away from her children, and about how she still, all these years later, maintains her innocence.
Sure.
Yes.
And we were also going to be talking about the interview now that you all were able to secure with her at the prison there, again, that you said both of you all went to attend. I want to play a soundbite that it came from that interview. So if you all will just bear with us just 1 second, we'll play that and then we'll come back and talk about it here in just a second.
I can do this. He's going to give me the strength to keep going. That is what I believe. But for some reason, I woke up on my birthday, and I was so tired. I didn't even want to wake up that day.
Again, Rosa Jimenez speaking from prison with our Avery Travis and Chelsea Moreno, who are joining us here. From what we are learning is that there is a possibility there is a retrial in this case. Can you tell us about where that stands at this point, Avery and Chelsea? What are the new details potentially with this case going forward?
Yeah, as you can see, it's a very emotional interview. We talked to her for about an hour because that day that she said she did not want to wake up, she didn't know if she could do this anymore. Just hours later is when, back in 2018, she found out that a judge had recommended that she be released or retried. That was Judge Lee Yackel in federal court. And since then, that has been appealed. So now they're pretty much in this legal limbo where the deadline for her to be released or retried was supposed to be set for next week, February 25th. Now that has been taken all the way up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that deadline has been delayed. So Rosa's still waiting.
All right. And we also wanted to speak to the DA in this case, Margaret Moore. And if you can, Avery, tell us what you all were wanting to talk to her about, and then we'll play a soundbite from her as well.
Yeah, so there's been lots of advocates in the case are calling on the DA to do something about it now, to take it back to a retrial and take a closer look at it now. The DA has said that she is waiting on those higher courts to make their decision and go through the appeals process, but she has said that she's appointed a unit to review the case and to see whether it should get a retrial. She's also tasked the county's conviction
Investigation looking into. One thing that had come up in your reporting, guys, was that Rosa Jimenez had a difficulty with English and being able to speak it fluently.
Yes.
And Chelsea, that's why you went along to be able to help with possible translation, but she's learned quite a bit in prison, is that right?
Yes, of course, a lot has changed since that first time she had her trial. She went in not knowing, she even explained she barely even knew how to say hello in English. And so being in that courtroom, she described it was overwhelming. She didn't really know what was going on. Yes, she did have a translator, but she said there were even points throughout the trial, the translator couldn't even translate that. So we wanted to make sure she would feel comfortable sharing her story. Again, Avery has mentioned this before, but she had reached out to the family as well of the little baby that died. They have not gotten back to us, but we wanted to make sure she felt comfortable sharing in her native language. So I went along as to help her share that voice, to have that voice, her side of the story, and this potential for her to go to retrial. Having that opportunity to share that side of her story in her own language would have been different, she said. She expressed that it's different explaining emotions, sharing that emotion, having that connection with somebody. Just speaking in your own language is just a comfort that would have been different for her. She explained that. And so we talked that out when we went, and we said, we'll let her decide. We'll let her decide whatever she wants to speak in. She wants to speak Spanish, great. She wants to speak English. Obviously that's a big difference for her now. She was able to learn that language throughout all of these years, and so it was much different for her. And she was able to express that emotion, as you saw, very emotional interview. We touched on some difficult things in that interview, and she was able to express that. You were able to hear that in her own voice. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure that she had that opportunity. And of course, she explained when she was in that courtroom, they gave her her sentence, and she even said then she didn't really understand. All she saw was her mom crying, and she didn't really understand, She was gonna spend, 99 years in prison at the time. So very different experience if she is going to have a new retrial this time around.
Yes, and we have another soundbite from her speaking kind of about that language difficulty and not really realizing maybe what was happening in court there. So let's take a listen to that, and we'll come back and talk some more afterward.
I didn't comprehend. I didn't understand 99 years in English. So I didn't have no clue how many years they gave me to, of course, later on when they pulled me to the side and the lawyer had to explain to me 99, it was like that moment. They strip you and they take everything away from you.
In this case, we don't want to forget about the victim. The little child who was killed here had some paper towels in his throat. tell us about that particular victim in this case and explain what his name is and some more details about him.
Yes, Bryan Gutierrez. We did reach out to the Gutierrez family. They did not want to comment at this time. The DA has told us that they are in touch with the family, so they're keeping the family abreast of what's going on with the possibility of the retrial. I know we've gotten a lot of questions from viewers as to why her case is being reconsidered. She was convicted by a jury here in Travis County, as you heard the DA say a bit earlier here in this live. The Innocence Project, what they do is they make sure that justice was correctly served. Their argument is that her defense did not have enough money the first time around to properly bring up all of the questions in the case that would have defended her. They do say that those new medical experts could prove that this may have been an accident. And we've got a little bit more on who those experts might be up on our website now in the article for this story. But as you heard the DA say, they have the experts that they presented the first time around in defense of her conviction. So it's definitely the reason that so many people are calling for a closer look at this case. I believe the DA said that's the factual issue that would be looked at in a retrial. 5 state lawmakers wrote a letter calling for a closer examination of the case because they want to hear from these new experts and some of these new facts to make sure that justice was served the first time around.
And if you're just joining us, we do have investigator Avery Travis here joining me, talking about her special report that airs this evening, as well as digital reporter Chelsea Moreno. She went along with this to the prison there to be able to possibly translate for Rosa Jimenez and help out with the interview in that way. So both of you, thank you for joining us here and discussing this report that again airs tonight on KXAN at 10 o'clock as well as on the CW at 9 o'clock, so you can join us for that as well. Is there anything that you all would like to share that before we wrap up our live stream and maybe share some more details on our website, anything you'd like to share before we end things?
Well, the thing I would like to say is obviously this is a heartbreaking case, having to relive the horrors of this for the family, for the Jimenez family as well. Having to dredge that back up in a possible retrial, it's a heartbreaking case, but it's something that must be talked about. One, to make sure justice is being served for both families. We did ask Rosa if she had a message, for the victims in this case, and she said she just wants peace on both sides. And so that's what we'll talk about with her more tonight.
Yes, and I did also want to stress, Avery, to your point about the details of that case. Of course, our first question to Rosa in jail would have been, tell us about that day, tell us what happened. But of course, we could not ask that question pending the possibility of her getting another retrial. And so we did have to tread on some very careful lines with direction from her attorneys as well as the justice system.
Once again, Avery Travis and Chelsea Moreno talking about a special report that airs this evening on KXAN. We do appreciate both of you joining us here. The special report is called Justice on the Line. It's there on the bottom of your screen. But again, this will air this evening. Prison interview with Rosa Jimenez there, convicted 15 years ago for the death of a little boy that she was babysitting. We want to thank you all again for watching here on KXAN Live.